There comes a moment in every Sigma Empath's life when something inside them hardens, not into coldness, but into clarity. A moment when they stop chasing, stop explaining, stop absorbing everyone else's chaos. And something in their energy shifts so deeply that people around them can feel it before they understand it. This video is about those moments. The quiet turning points where a Sigma Empath becomes unreachable, not because they shut down, but because they finally rise above everything that once drained them. If you've ever felt yourself disconnect, not out of anger, but out of self-preservation. If you've ever hit a point where the noise around you no longer mattered and your intuition took over. You already know how powerful these turning points can be. Sigma Empaths don't disappear to punish anyone. They disappear because their spirit refuses to stay where it's not valued, understood, or respected. And when that shift happens, the people who once had access to them suddenly realize the door has closed, silently, completely, and forever. Before we go deeper, I want to ask you something real. Have you ever become unreachable to someone who thought they would always have access to you? Tell me in the comments. And to show you're here till the end, type unreachable. It helps this video reach the people who need it most. If you're new, subscribe to Brainy Empath, because missing the rest of this series means missing the psychological truths that will change the way you see yourself forever. They become unreachable the moment they realize their emotional labor is being taken for granted. A Sigma Empath's breaking point is never loud. It doesn't arrive in an argument, a dramatic exit, or a final desperate plea to be understood. It arrives quietly, at the exact moment they realize that the care they've been pouring into someone has become invisible. Emotional labor is their instinct, the listening, the soothing, the understanding, the stabilizing. They give without keeping score. They hold space without asking for anything back. But there always comes a day when they notice the imbalance, a day when they wake up and see that their support has become an expectation, not a gift, that their compassion is being consumed without gratitude, that their presence is being used but not valued. And in that moment, something inside them withdraws so silently that most people don't notice until the empath is already gone. The shift begins internally. They stop anticipating other people's needs. They stop cushioning their words to protect fragile egos. They stop offering emotional clarity to someone who refuses to grow. The empath's mind starts collecting the overlooked moments, the times they comforted someone who never checked on them, the times they forgave hurt without receiving accountability, the times their kindness was taken as weakness rather than grace. Recognition becomes the catalyst. Once they see the pattern, that their emotional effort has become a comfortable dependency for someone else, they lose the ability to keep giving. Their empathy is deep, but it is not infinite. And once it is taken for granted, their heart shuts the door instinctively. What makes a Sigma Empath unreachable is not anger. It is understanding. They understand that continuing to give where nothing is returned is self-betrayal. They understand that someone who takes their emotional labor for granted will only continue to do so. They understand that staying would require them to shrink, dim, or exhaust themselves. And Sigma Empaths do not stay where they must sacrifice their peace to maintain someone else's comfort. So they retreat, quietly but completely. Their messages grow shorter. Their availability fades. Their emotional presence dissolves. They stop being the one who fixes, who reassures, who holds everything together. By the time the other person realizes what has happened, the empath has already moved on internally. They aren't reachable because they no longer feel responsible for someone who misused their warmth. They don't explain the withdrawal. They don't justify it. They simply reclaim the energy that was taken for granted and redirect it toward their own healing. And once a Sigma Empath reaches this point, there is no path back. Their absence becomes permanent, not out of cruelty, but out of self-respect. They become unreachable when their intuition confirms someone's true intentions. A Sigma Empath doesn't pull away because of words. They pull away because of truth. And the moment their intuition finally aligns with the patterns they've been sensing, everything changes. They may have given someone the benefit of the doubt, listened to excuses, forgiven inconsistent behavior, or waited for emotional honesty. But intuition is the one voice they can never silence. When it confirms what their heart didn't want to admit, selfish motives, hidden agendas, emotional manipulation, or lack of genuine care, the connection dies instantly. Not dramatically, not with confrontation, but with a calm internal shift that feels irreversible. Once they see someone's intentions clearly, the emotional door closes all on its own. This clarity hits them like a quiet revelation. They replay past conversations, analyzing tone instead of words. They revisit small body language glitches they once ignored. They remember the subtle moments of discomfort, the uneasy pauses, the contradictions that didn't make sense at the time. Suddenly, the picture sharpens. What the person wanted from them, what they expected, what they were trying to take. It becomes obvious that the connection was never balanced, that their empathy was being used as a resource instead of being appreciated as a gift. And once the Sigma Empath sees someone's motives clearly, they cannot unsee it. Their intuition turns the lights on in a room others prefer to keep dark. What makes this moment so powerful is how effortlessly they detach afterward. They don't argue for clarity, they already have it. They don't demand accountability, they know they won't receive it. They don't wait for change. They've learned that intentions rarely shift. Their intuition becomes the proof that logic couldn't provide. And once they trust that deeper knowing, the relationship loses its emotional grip. Attachment fades. Hope dissolves. The empath's inner world closes like a gate, and they step back with a level of calm that feels unnerving to anyone who once relied on their emotional availability. By the time the other person realizes something is wrong, the Sigma Empath is already miles away emotionally. They're unreachable because there is no longer a question mark in their mind, no emotional confusion to resolve, no illusion left to hold on to. Their intuition has spoken, and for a Sigma Empath, that is final. Once they know someone's true intentions, they no longer participate in the performance. They walk away without a sound, without anger, and without looking back, because truth, once seen clearly, makes staying impossible. They become unreachable after giving too many chances and seeing no real change. A Sigma Empath's patience is vast, but it is not eternal. They will give chance after chance, not because they are naive, but because they genuinely believe in people's potential to grow. They forgive honestly, listen fully, and hope deeply. But each chance they offer is a silent test, a chance for the other person to show effort, consistency, or the willingness to meet them halfway. When someone repeatedly fails that test, when apologies become recycled scripts, when promises dissolve into familiar patterns, when behavior stays the same despite their emotional generosity, the empath's heart eventually reaches its threshold. And when it does, their withdrawal is complete. They don't issue warnings. They don't negotiate anymore. They simply stop giving what is being wasted. This realization hits them quietly but decisively. They start noticing how drained they feel after every interaction, how the relationship always returns to the same emotional cycle, how their compassion has turned into maintenance for someone else's dysfunction. They begin recognizing that they are the only one doing the emotional work, the only one trying to repair cracks the other person keeps creating. That's when the fatigue turns into clarity. The empath sees that giving more won't change anything because the other person wants their comfort, not their accountability. And once this understanding takes root, their desire to keep investing disappears. They no longer feel inspired to try again because there's nothing new to try for. When a Sigma Empath reaches this point, detachment happens naturally. Their messages become shorter. Their emotional availability fades. The warmth they once offered is replaced by a calm neutrality that feels colder than silence. not out of spite, but because their spirit has stopped responding to someone who refuses to grow. They stop offering explanations because they realize explaining never led to change. They stop offering compassion because compassion is meaningless without effort from the other side. They stop offering chances because every chance became permission for the same cycle to continue. By the time the other person notices the distance, the empath is already unreachable. Not because they are angry, but because they are done. There is no resentment left, only closure. They've seen enough to know that staying will only repeat the pattern they've already lived through. And Sigma empaths never willingly return to cycles that cost them their peace. When they leave after too many chances, it is permanent. They don't reopen that door. They don't reconsider. They rise beyond the relationship because they finally understand that real change comes from within, and the other person never truly wanted it. They become unreachable when someone repeatedly drains their energy without giving anything back. A Sigma empath can carry a lot, but nothing exhausts them faster than a one-sided connection, one where they are always the giver, the healer, the emotional anchor, and never the one being held. At first, they offer their energy freely. They listen. They comfort. They stabilize the storm someone else refuses to calm within themselves. But as the pattern repeats, crisis after crisis, drama after drama, need after need, the empath begins to feel a slow depletion inside. It's not just tiredness, it's a spiritual erosion. They start noticing that every conversation leaves them a little heavier, every interaction a little more hollow. And the realization hits them, they are pouring into someone who has no intention or no capacity to pour back. The moment this truth sinks in, disconnection begins. This kind of energy drainage isn't always obvious at first. It hides in small things. The friend who only calls when they need something, the partner who wants comfort but never asks how the empath is doing, the family member who assumes the empath will always be emotionally available on demand. Over time, the empath notices that their own needs go ignored, their own emotions dismissed, their own boundaries crossed. They see that they're being used as an emotional generator, recharged solely to power someone else. And Sigma empaths don't remain in spaces where they're treated like a resource instead of a person. The exhaustion that once felt manageable becomes a signal, a warning from their intuition that staying any longer would mean losing parts of themselves. Once they reach this threshold, something inside them flips. The desire to help fades. The automatic empathy turns off. Their emotional generosity shuts down like a gate closing with finality. They stop responding to emotional emergencies that aren't theirs. They stop offering warmth to someone who treats it like an entitlement. They stop showing up for a connection that requires them to shrink so someone else can feel big. And this shift doesn't come with anger, it comes with clarity. They don't explode. They don't accuse. They simply retreat in silence to protect what remains of their spirit. By the time the other person realizes something has changed, the Sigma empath is already gone emotionally. They've withdrawn to a place where their energy is no longer accessible, where their heart no longer responds to guilt, demands, or emotional manipulation. They become unreachable because they finally understand the true cost of staying connected to someone who only takes. And once a Sigma empath chooses to reclaim their energy, there is no return. Their absence becomes permanent, not as punishment, but as self-preservation. They become unreachable the moment they stop explaining their worth to people who don't value it. For a long time, a Sigma empath will try to make others understand the depth of what they offer, their loyalty, their emotional intelligence, their support, their rare ability to love with sincerity and intuition. They believe that if they communicate clearly enough, show up consistently enough, or love deeply enough, the other person will finally recognize the value standing right in front of them. But eventually, the empath realizes something profound. People who cannot see their worth will never understand it, no matter how clearly it's explained. And that moment becomes a turning point, a quiet internal shift where they stop justifying, stop proving, stop educating someone on how to treat them. They withdraw not to punish, but because explaining themselves has become a form of self-betrayal. It begins with noticing how much effort they put into being understood. The conversations where they expressed their needs only to be dismissed. The moments they made themselves smaller to avoid being too much. The emotional transparency that was met with indifference or confusion. They start to see that the more they explain their value, the less it's respected. Their worth becomes something others take for granted precisely because it is always available, always spoken, always offered. And a Sigma empath does not tolerate a life where they must continuously convince someone to appreciate what is rare and irreplaceable about them. Their soul grows tired of being misunderstood by choice, not by accident. So they stop. They stop clarifying their intentions. They stop reminding someone of their effort. They stop highlighting the difference between genuine connection and emotional convenience. In that silence, empowerment rises. The Sigma empath recognizes that their energy belongs where it is seen, without explanation, cherished without persuasion, valued without performance. Their withdrawal is subtle but irreversible. They no longer fight to prove their worth because they know their worth stands on its own. And the moment they stop explaining, the other person loses all emotional access to them. By the time the other person realizes what has happened, the empath has already risen beyond the relationship. They have reclaimed their self-respect and redirected their loyalty inward. They are unreachable because they no longer seek validation from those who never understood them. They have stepped into a higher standard of connection, one where their value is recognized naturally, not negotiated. And once a Sigma empath reaches this level of clarity, they never go back to places that required them to argue for their own worth. They become unreachable when silence gives them more clarity than conversations ever did. A Sigma empath doesn't walk away the first time someone disappoints them. They try to talk, to understand, to rebuild. They listen carefully to every explanation, every promise, every emotional plea. But eventually, there comes a moment when words stop meaning anything, when conversations become loops instead of solutions, when tone reveals more truth than language, and when silence becomes the only place where clarity still exists. In that silence, the empath finally sees what conversations were hiding. The repeated patterns, the subtle lies, the emotional withdrawals, the unmet needs, the truth behind the mask. And once silence becomes more honest than speech, the empath begins to rise out of the relationship with a calm certainty that cannot be reversed. This shift is not dramatic. It is quiet, internal, almost invisible from the outside. They stop filling empty spaces with reassurance. They stop chasing emotional honesty from someone who only offers fragments. They stop asking questions because the answers no longer matter. In the stillness, their intuition begins to speak louder than the other person's excuses. They notice how peaceful they feel without constant emotional negotiation. They notice how their nervous system relaxes when they're away from the person. They notice how clarity sharpens when they are no longer influenced by someone else's narrative. Silence becomes a sanctuary, a place where they reconnect with their boundaries, their self-worth, and their inner truth. Once they recognize that silence reveals what conversations disguise, the empath's emotional investment dissolves. They detach not because they're angry, but because the truth has finally settled. This connection only makes sense when they're the one holding it together. They realize that every time they stopped speaking, the other person stopped trying. They see that when their voice softened, the other person grew comfortable. And when silence finally spoke louder than words, they understood everything they needed to know. By the time the other person senses the withdrawal, it is too late. The Sigma empath has already crossed an invisible threshold. They have found more honesty in their own quiet than they ever found in shared dialogue. And once they reach that level of clarity, they become emotionally unreachable, not because they shut down, but because they woke up. They learned that silence is not emptiness, it is truth, protection, and power. And they never return to relationships that only make sense when they silence themselves. They become unreachable once they choose peace over connection and never look back. For a Sigma Empath, the final breaking point is not betrayal, disrespect, or even heartbreak. It is the loss of inner peace. The moment they realize a connection consistently disrupts their emotional balance, drains their nervous system, or forces them to abandon their own needs, something inside them shifts permanently. They stop choosing the relationship and start choosing themselves. And once peace becomes their priority, access to them disappears. They no longer tolerate chaos disguised as passion, inconsistency mistaken for effort, or emotional neglect wrapped in empty apologies. They step out of the cycle with a quiet, unwavering certainty that leaves the other person stunned. Because when a Sigma Empath chooses peace, they don't negotiate. They don't revisit the decision. They don't look back. This transformation happens internally long before it becomes visible. They begin noticing how calm their mind feels when they're alone, how their thoughts become clearer when they step away, how their heart stops aching when they stop hoping someone will change. They start to understand that peace is not the absence of connection, it's the presence of alignment. And the more they taste that stillness, the more allergic they become to anything that disturbs it. The connection they once protected with all their strength slowly loses its influence. The emotional hooks loosen. The attachment dissolves. What remains is clarity so strong that even nostalgia cannot break it. The moment they fully embrace peace, they become unreachable in a way most people cannot comprehend. Not because they build walls, but because they stop opening doors that lead back to pain. They won't answer messages meant to pull them into old dynamics. They won't engage in conversations that reopen closed wounds. They won't entertain relationships that require them to abandon themselves. Their silence is not vengeance, it's elevation. A conscious decision to live in a mental and emotional environment where their intuition, energy, and purpose are protected. By the time anyone realizes what happened, the Sigma Empath has already stepped into a new version of themselves, one that no longer depends on connection for validation. They carry a quiet strength that cannot be manipulated, guilted, or softened. They are unreachable because their peace is finally intact, and they know exactly what it cost them to earn it. And once a Sigma Empath reaches that level of inner stillness, they never trade it for anyone, not even for the person they once loved the most. When a Sigma Empath reaches this point, it isn't a phase, it's a transformation. They don't become cold, they become clear. They don't become distant, they become aligned. The people who once had easy access to their heart suddenly find nothing but calm silence where emotional availability used to be. And that silence is the final proof. The empath didn't walk away to hurt anyone. They walked away to heal themselves. Once they choose peace, they never again settle for the kind of connection that cost them their soul. Before you leave, I want to hear from you. Have you ever chosen peace, even when it meant losing someone? Tell me in the comments. And to show you stayed until the end, type peace first. It helps this message reach others who need it. If you're new here, subscribe to Brainy Empath so you don't miss the next chapter in understanding your intuition, your strength, and the quiet power you never knew you had.